fantastic colleague and longtime friend that I know from Los Angeles, Megan Metcalf. So I'm going to speak until, and we're going to be together until about 11:15, 11:30-ish, and then I'll pass over to Megan. So I feel I've got a kind of a short window to both bring you into the work that I've been doing with the art repertoire, mainly Trio A, but also to introduce some of the kind of experiential practice with that and to move a little bit with that. So I'm not sure the order of it. I'm kind of feeling the room at the moment to see what's needed. But two main points that I'm hoping to get across today is this idea of transmission. Maybe I'll just start with some slides. This idea of transmission, of transmitting a dance from one body to the other, and this idea of preservation or conservation of this dance. The Getty Research Center in Los Angeles holds some of the archive of Yvonne Rayner's work, so all of her notes, sort of material ephemera of her practice. So notes, sketches, and I don't think they have video. Do they? They have video? But what I'm starting to wonder is where in this archive of Yvonne Rayner's work is something around the act of transmission and what that means, and sort of the method of that, and who's doing that, and how we're doing that. It's myself and 6 other dance artists, mainly they're based in New York, and one on the West Coast, and I'm in the UK, and there's another person who's in Belgium. So we're sort of spread out. We don't have a lot of interaction with each other, so I've become curious, because Yvonne Rayner's turning 90 in November this year, of when Yvonne is no longer here in the living form, what is this transmission position within the archive, the sort of living archive, and what might also, I think my interest is also in this kind of this social relational, how might those connections with these other transmitters shift and change when the artist who's typically at the center, sort of the matriarch, may not be there then in the physical form at that time. So I'm both interested in this possibility of thinking about what might be missing in the archive of Rayner's work in terms of transmission, but also this kind of social relational caring that the transmitters and I do, and how our relationship to Yvonne with each other might be thought further about. So these are really open general questions I'm holding. I don't have the answers, but I'm just bringing that into the room, and be really open to conversations about that. I assume everyone has seen Trio A. If not, please raise your hand. No. Okay, great. Let's watch a little bit of Yvonne Rayner's Trio A, which was made in 1966. It was initially part of a larger work called The Mind the Muscle. This film is from 1978, so a decade later this was filmed. This is Yvonne Rayner performing Trio A. Here is her music. His first movement, which she calls Rocks on the End of the String, sets the pacing. So the dancer tries to keep that timing of that first move throughout the full 4.5, 5-minute dance. It's a dance that is composed of a series of movement sequences that never stop. There are no pauses, there are no stops. It's one continuous, ongoing, kind of like a run-on sentence with no commas or periods. She's taking movements borrowed a lot from ballet, but she's also sort of manipulating them or turning them inside out or morphing them. She's also taking movements from every day, running, walking. I call this a dancer's dance. It looks easy to do. People call it often pedestrian. And if you've learned some of the dance, there's nothing pedestrian about it, actually, except walking and running. It's complex sequencing, it's a lot of juxtapositioning, so 2 or 3 things happening in the body at once that do not make sense together. Therefore, it's hard to remember. She also wants it to be hard to see. The dancer never looks at the audience. The dancers always look either at corners of the room, at the ceiling, at the floor, at their own body, or eyes closed. This sort of kind of pre-feminism. Also, if you think about kind of the male gaze, she wanted to kind of get away from this idea of the kind of enjoyment of the existentialism of dancing being looked at and presenting oneself. I think Carrie Lambert Beatty says something about the eye of the beholder in this dance. It's not so much about the body of the dancer, it's in the eyes of the beholder. She was interested in the viewer being aware of their kind of consciousness of watching and kind of reaction to it. She doesn't deliver in this dance, so you might come to it expecting certain things because it's a dance piece. But there are no climaxes, there are no high kicks, there's no showing of technique or virtuosity. She wasn't interested in her beauty. You might know her No Manifesto, which was written not directly related to Trio A, but her No Manifesto was, I think, 1963. No to spectacle, no to make-believe, no to moving or being moved. She wanted to get away from the kind of presentational spectacle of dance. At the same time, though, she was studying with Merce Cunningham, she was studying ballet, she was a trained dancer, but she was then going to the Judson Dance Theatre and working on movements that were sort of anti kind of technique and trying to turn things inside out, to complicate this idea of seeing dance. I think one critic called it like woolen underwear. Like it's just kind of uncomfortable. It can be boring. No, she's fine with that. There's so much to say about it, sort of running through my head. Initially, yes, it was a trio, but it went on to be a solo for large groups. It had many variations, and she felt very strongly at the time in 1966 that this should be available for anybody. So you didn't have to have dance training, anybody could perform it, teach it, pass it on, kind of open source concept. And then at one point, I think in the 80s, she said, I saw a trio A I did not recognize. So you can imagine seeing your work with your name on it and you don't recognize it. So at some point, she started to rein it in, pun intended, bringing it back and certifying dancers to then teach it, to sort of have some level of control over quality and integrity of the work. And there's some concerns about that, of, well, it has, you know, it's kind of attached to this culture of open source, and yet she says, well, you're entitled to change your mind after 15 years or so. Which, if you look at her manifesto, I think 39 years later, she rewrote, well, she didn't rewrite her manifesto, she commented on her manifesto, so she wrote a kind of response to her manifesto. No to moving and being moved, you know, impossible. I don't have it in my head exactly. No to spectacle, okay, sometimes. You know, there was a commentary. And I think she's an artist who is incredibly committed to her methodology, her concepts, her views, but she's also a human being who changes her mind and decides otherwise, and has a sense of humor about it. So often when I transmit this to others, there's a question of, you know, is it something I can go on and teach others? And the answer is, you know, she wants to know, she wants to keep it within the 7 of us teaching it. Yes, she can perform it as the dancers did in Berlin, but she has them sign an agreement that they won't perform it or pass it on without her permission. And I don't know if any dancer I taught it to has ever gotten her permission to go on, but she said, you know, have a conversation with you about that. So she wants some level of control over this, the legacy of this work. And what else do I want to say? Any questions about the work in particular that I'll move on? I'll speak a bit about how I came to be a transmitter, but I'll move on. So in 2010, I had been studying with Yvonne at the University of California, Los Angeles and Irvine. She was teaching a class called Approaches to Performance, which we were basically reading really heavy theory and making performances about that. And when that course was over, I wanted to continue to work with her, and I said I'd really love to learn Trio A, this iconic dance that I felt I already sort of knew in my body, but I'd never done it. Could I learn it in order to teach it? She said, well, that's fine, you could do that, I'll teach it to you, we work in the studio together, and you'll be one of, at the time, the 5th transmitter. At the time, I had no idea what that meant, but she had already kind of certified 4 other dancers at the time, and I said, well, is there a certification? If there was, what would it say on it? She just laughed. She said, no, there's no official certification. It's just very informal, social network. All of us know her in some capacity. There's a level of friendship with her. We were both living in Los Angeles quite disgruntledly. I had moved from Amsterdam, she moved from New York, and both sort of hated LA at the beginning, and we sort of spent time together, both in the studio and outside of the studio. So there's something also within the transition process and in dance in general that is always about human relationships and the relational, and I think sometimes that gets lost in translation. It has also been notated with law of notation by Melanie Clark and Jan Foucault, and she has seen versions of it performed off of the notation score. Not super happy about it. She's definitely not allowing people to learn it from the video, which is interesting. It was one of the dancers in Berlin that I hired to work with me, Fred Gehrig, who's an amazing dancer. He's 57, he's absolutely brilliant, and he came the first day of rehearsal, and he learned the whole dance from the video, and I was like, you did what? And I was like, you need to unlearn all of that. And he kept saying, but she doesn't like this in the video. I said, yes, but I'm teaching you Trio A that I learned from Yvonne in 2010, and you just have to forget about the video. Because Yvonne says there are mistakes in it, she wasn't happy, you know, you can't, it's flattening, you can't see where the eyes are. So she puts the authority in the living dancer, the lived live transmission, dismisses the video. I do use it for just reference in case I forget something. Oh yeah, that's the next movement. And a lot of notation, she's sort of okay with it. So if you can read a lot of notation or higher score, you can. It's another way to transmit the work. But it's interesting too because she has these notes. That's my pointer. She has these notes she insisted on putting alongside, right arm parallel to the left leg. She didn't quite trust that this system could cover everything. It's a highly detailed system. Some of you might be able to write it or read it, but still she didn't quite feel that that was enough, and that language and her words needed to be inserted on the side as kind of footnotes. Which is interesting for me to think about my own notation system, which looks like chicken scratch. But it was a way for me to think through images and text and to put something down that allowed me to have trust in that there's something written down in case my, let's say, call it muscle memory, fails me, and the video is not really the source, and Yvonne may not be here to ask questions to it in the future. So I just started notating the movements, trying to capture her language on these just little note cards. This is note card 8, and there are about 100 of them, which also kind of attests to how rigorous dance is. I mean, to write dance down takes forever. Like, to do one movement, okay, right arm, left arm, foot, where are you looking? It's rigorous and arduous, so it was quite a thing for me to just track the dance all the way through. I've never actually used these cards, but they kind of sit there as a safety net for me, and just in case, she sort of thought they weren't necessary, but for me, I thought, you know, I want to be able to remember the Cleopatra hand, there's this movement. So I try to capture not just the movements themselves, but her words, her language, and there's a version, if we have time today, I can do a bit of it, if we have time to do the whole thing, where I speak the language behind the dance while dancing it, because that's the script in my head in which I'm using to get through it. So there's some aspect of words and language that has been really important to me. I asked Yvonne once, what's in your head when you perform Trio A? And she kind of answered like a Zen Buddhist. She didn't really answer the question. She's like, what's in my head? What's in your head when you're dancing? Because I've got words running through my head. She's like, da 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 da, she da 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 da. You know, so that's useful information of what's going on there to kind of move through it, and how can that be captured as part of the kind of transfer. I'm just going to skip through these just to say the work has been shown a lot to museums and galleries. Raven Road in London in 2014, alongside facsimiles of some of her archive from the Getty, which I thought was fascinating. I did find it later that they weren't the actual documents, but facsimiles, copies of documents from her archive in the Getty that were part of the exhibition as a whole, which was lovely to have both the kind of documents of Yvonne's work, photographs, notes, sketches, and then the dances going on in the gallery as well. Okay. Just going to talk briefly about this concept of mobilizing the archive. It's not my concept. It's Michael Blaker, who's at the University of Utrecht, and Laura Karaman have written about this idea of mobilizing the archive. So for me, this is something about allowing the archive to live and breathe and move, instead of keeping it fixed and in storage. This idea of like permanent transfer. So when I think about transmitting Trio A, I think it's putting the archive into motion. It's mobile. I was just in Berlin, I'm here now, I'll be somewhere else, people come to me, that there's an exchange, so it's alive and it's living and it's moving, and it's hard to hold, so it's shifting all the time too, it is changing, and what do I mean by that? Changing not in the sense the dance is changing, but yeah, it's alive and out there, and it's not the exact same dance you're going to see in the video. feel. It's not the same dance in 2010, and people who are learning are also holding it in their bodies and their memory into the future. So there's something about mobilizing the archive that feels really important to me. And this notion of exchange, setting knowledge in motion, creating awareness about the exclusions and absences in our existing systems of knowledge, and to invite a reconsideration of the role that archives play in that. So both kind of questioning, who has access to the archive, and how does the archive get mobilized, how is it accessible and sustainable? And in particular, because Yvonne has become quite insistent that only professionally trained dancers perform trio A, which is slightly different than it was in 2010. I'm interested in, okay, I will do whatever she wants with that, but I also think there's something about the methodologies and how that work was made that feels really important to share as widely as possible, particularly in this moment. For example, in Trio A, no movement is more important than any other movement. That is a concept. So you never emphasize any movement over another movement. There's something about equity in there. Another of her dances, Diagonal, which is a group improvisation. It has, because it's built-in structure, shared leadership. No one ever is leading for very long. The leadership is passed. So there's something in her work around the social, relational, political ways of being together that I think are really, really crucial and really important. And I think they're visible when you see the dances, but I think there's something about teasing those out, workshopping them, and giving access to those ways of making and thinking in a choreographic way. So for example, there have been moments that I've done workshops where I've not taught Trio A to someone, but we've taken some of the methodologies of create a solo that's 4.5 minutes long in which no movement repeats, 2 or 3 things happening in the body at once, and you never look at the audience, and just see what gets produced. So actually kind of remaking it through the ways in which this dance was created, rather than trying to fix it as a final product. Does that kind of make sense? So I'm interested in kind of peeling away the layer of the product and going deep and going, what's going on in there? Because there's some incredible social, relational, political decisions she makes within, she puts them in the choreographic practice, which is a tool. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. I restaged a work of her street action in Wrocław, Poland recently. I think you knew about this. And that had not, as far as she knew, that had not been restaged. The curator wanted that work. So I said, Yvonne, can I restage street action? It's an action, someone might call it a protest dance. It's dancers moving through the street with their arms hooked, very slow, with a movement inspired by the film by Fritz Lang, Metropolis, where the workers are all going to work like robots. Reminds you of Amazon. And we had the dancers moving through the streets, almost very somber-like, very kind of mourning-like. It's not a protest dance, it's an action. It's called street action, but it was at the time that the Vietnam War was going on and Kent State shootings. And it was in response to these tragedies in the world. And when I asked Yvonne, can I restage this in Wrocław, Poland, she said, what are they protesting? Which is fascinating. She didn't say, yeah, of course, restage my work, great opportunity to show the work. She wanted to know why. And it was so interesting. It was almost like, okay, so does this dance get reenacted when there's a reason or purpose behind it in terms of protesting or reason? And so I went back to the curator. Yvonne wants to know, what are you protesting? And she said, well, the war in Iraq, war in Israel, wars in general. Went back to Yvonne and she said, yes, okay, of course. It's not it's a comment. It's a kind of a, I think Carrie Lamborghini also writes about street action in this beautiful way. It's not, it's a Christian. I think she's still wanting the body of the viewer, consciousness of the viewer, to kind of look at this and kind of be aware of their own consciousness around it. So we're moving through the streets in Wrocław, Poland. People are looking at it. They're not sure what to make of it. And they come up and start asking questions about it. We have conversations about it. And we say, this is work by Yvonne Rainer at the time, 1972, during the Vietnam War. The war's going on now. This is a kind of a choreographic action through the streets. It's a moment of mourning and response to that. And those conversations were so key and so important. Again, that's kind of social interaction. But she's never said, for example, in Trio A, if I said, the Neue Nationale Gallery wants to restage Trio A, she wouldn't say why. So it's just interesting to think about some of her works and reasonings around them, and what they're saying in terms of the social, the political, and the kind of contemporary cultural moment we're in and when these works are shown. So that's one I'm still thinking about. Street action being an action that takes place in cities in a moment in 2024 that has similar reflections as it did in 1972. And what those reenactments mean in different contexts for her work.
And how do you really transmit also not only through the body and presenting movement, but actually exactly what you mentioned, developing a very particular vocabulary and methodology of bringing up associations, images. But actually, I never heard somebody teaching movement saying, and now she's doing this, and now she's doing that, and not in the past tense, she was doing it. So I wanted to actually ask you, is it on purpose, and is it one of the strategies, and could you develop a little bit more on this issue, I mean, of this strategy of transmitting with including Yvonne in a room, in a way?
It's a great question, and I know Megan next to me has learned the whole dance with Yvonne and me in the room, so feel free to jump in on that. Just briefly, what comes up for me is Yvonne's, maybe the voice of people often is what, I mean, my mother's not here anymore, but I remember her voice more than I even remember her body. Maybe this says more, we're all different, maybe that's just my experience. Yvonne's voice feels very present for me. She is still here in the physical sense, but I don't work with her, I don't spend a lot of time with her anymore, because we're not in Los Angeles together, sometimes we Zoom, but I have her voice in my head, I think, when I'm teaching it, and there's also something very particular about her way of speaking and writing. She's incredibly articulate, as we know, and I think language is important to her as well. So for me, those words are as important as the movements themselves, and maybe it brings her in the room, because they're not my words, they're not my names of those movements, they're hers, and so that's part of the process of transmitting as well. I don't know if you want to say anything to your experience when you learned an idea of language.
May I also have a question about hygiene of yourself as a transmitter?
Hygiene.
Yes. Do you actually, because I mean, I have an immediate association with meditation. When I was learning meditation, I was on a course, I was giving my mantra, I was introduced to meditation, and then I was told, every now and then, please come back for a refreshment session. And then actually I'm wondering, since you are doing it already for such a long time, is there any kind of hygienic procedure to maintain your memory of this transmission of direct contact with Yvonne? Do you revisit this encounter to keep the form not being through your body already over years changed? Do you know what I mean?
I would just say we're human beings and our bodies are messy, leaky, expressive, complex things that aren't, I embrace the livingness of it, and I think she does as well. I think she is strict in one way, but she also recognizes, okay, you've got a dancer that has a bit of a knee issue. She just says the movement, and she's not precious that it has to be a kind of hygienic experience in that way, that it's so clinical. There is always room for error and slippage because we're human beings, and I guess you could say the same about objects as well. But
Do you do tune-up sessions with her?
yeah. Oh, okay. So one of the things, thank you for saying that. So we'll do what's called a tune-up, which is a funny word as well, as you tune up your car. So if I get a chance with Yvonne, either by Zoom, I'll show her a video, or if I'm in person with her, she'll see a version of my trio. And as dancers know in the room, you always get corrections. If you're a trained dancer, it's rare that you go to dance classes and never get a correction. So you get corrected. We're used to this from day one. Like, it's brutal, isn't it? But it's lovely too. You go to a dance class, you do your movement, and the teacher's going to correct you and say, no, it's not like that, it's like that. And so the next day you come, don't do it like that, do it like that. You take the correction in and you apply it. So I think there is always, there's always things that could be tweaked and better. But at the Neue Nationale Gallery, at one point with the dancers, I said, you know what? It's theirs now, and I'm not going to keep giving corrections at every single performance. But dancers expect that. You expect, right, after every performance to get corrections, to come back and notes, maybe in theater as well. So I think there's an assumption that you never land on this perfect version. And she says, we interviewed her and presented it last week. She did a Zoom interview with Gregor, the curator. And she said in the interview, I only once did a perfect trio A. Only once. She said it was after I got out of hospital. She calls it the convalescence. She'd been in hospital. She was incredibly exhausted, and it was her best trio A. And it says something to sort of doing it without any extra effort and doing the mechanics and just getting through it without having to articulate further than the simple labor of just doing the movements in the most efficient way. So, yeah, there's some tidbits to the answer.
Knee, left hand escapes. Pivot to windmill. Padding. I'm not getting to some of the other ones. So, heels, elbows, step, step, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So sometimes there's counting. Sometimes it's radajam, and step, step, up and down, radajam, and step, 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 and look.
So she refers to like ballet
Yes.
vocabulary. She refers back to the body as a whole, and she refers back to body parts. And she refers also back to imagery, like when you said airplane, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and she's interested in sports and you know, the physics of things. Rocks on the end of a string, as if your hands are rocks and your arms are strings, and you don't do this, because if your hands are rocks, you're just going to do this, which sets, it's physics, right?
And
Sets
the
the pace.
referring to the missing just came by not being capable anymore to do certain things. If not,
Yes.
you always recall the present.
If you can't do something, you say the movement or you modify.
Okay.
Yeah. There's something else I was going to say, but I think it's left. Oh, there's a Martha, so she's referencing a lot of dance history. So there's Martha Graham.
And she
Anyone in dance is going to recognize
it like Graham.
She calls it Martha Graham. Allow the ballet arm, so this arm wants to be ballet arm. This is holding it back. Allow the ballet arm. This is a fifth position in ballet. This is what you're doing a lot, so she turns everything in, and then there's, don't laugh, the Rainer coupe. So a coupe is like this ballet. She's twisting it the other way. So she's literally kind of taking the piss out of ballet. You know, arabesque is this. In trio A, it's that. Tuck your chin. She does this. You know, bad posture. You know, like down and like. She has danza nobile. She's commenting, citing ballet.
And would you say then that just she did a twist that just professionals are allowed? As I understand, would that be reclaiming kind of dance technique?
I don't know if she would. I couldn't speak for her on that. I sense not. I think she wants to see the work done in a way that feels it has integrity for her. And I think that has to do with the way it's performed in mechanics. Is someone else have a question?
Yeah, my question was more about this body, mind, and somatic, or also emotional component. So it seems like kind of it's non-emotional dance, and every movement is equal, and so on. What's behind? Was there still some kind of meaning in terms of body, mind, somatic, emotional? For her, or maybe for you when you do this, and when you know already this dance, maybe you get into some special state, or you know what's happening there with you, because you were asking her about words, and I'm asking about like emotions and feelings and those things.
Yeah, I think that comes up a lot, and I'll speak for how I think Yvonne has often answered that, and I can speak about my own experience. Somewhere she said about someone's, maybe about airplane, I don't know. Do it like an airplane, not like not anything more. It's functional. There's a functionality. I always think, when you're cooking, you're doing all these actions, and you're doing it kind of unconsciously. You're not being looked at. You don't stir the pot. You just stir the pot. She often says like hammering a nail. She's interested in the functionality, the action of the movement, and she's not interested in the emotional content of that. But I will also say, as a human being who has a brain and a body, and this brain wants to do all kinds of things. So when I'm performing, what goes through the mind is the script, but it's also
People are nervous, people are watching you, and your brain can kind of, go off. It's like this book I read about tennis. My dad is a former tennis player, and in tennis, if you're trying to hit the ball and your mind's thinking about what you're going to have for dinner that night, probably you're not going to, but there's a flow and there's a presence with something that when you're not somewhere else, and I don't think she's talking about presence in her work, but I do think there's an element of being present with just doing the action and getting away from. I find it a mental real challenge, and I love this dance because it gets me into a place of just do the business of dancing. The audience does the business of watching, and you just happen to be in the same room together. And this lovely, again, social, political, relational thing of being alone together, and Catherine Wood has written about that. Caring at a distance, not having to engage. The dancers don't engage with each other, you don't engage with the audience, and there's something really beautiful about that. And I've been thinking a lot about that just in terms of kind of that humanity, kind of a human aspect of it. Just being with yourself, being with the action, allowing others to be with their actions, getting out of the way. So when you have three dancers doing it, it's lovely. They never look at each other, but they are highly aware of their space. I mean, you saw the work. They could easily run into each other, but dancers are pretty aware of their spatial. So it's a lovely thing to watch three people busy at work, not engage with each other, but respecting each other's space and just letting difference be in the room as well. So I'm interested in those aspects, but she would say, just do the work, just do the action.
So to bring also a conservation aspect a little bit to the conversation, and I don't remember if we discussed that in London when we shared the space there in the workshop a few months ago, or whether you mentioned already there is this film which we watched, which has a very particular status. I'm very curious about the film itself, but also about its documentary status. Conservation quite often, records things, dances, performances, and so on, and uses these recordings, these video recordings, as a point of reference, for future redoings, reenactments, iterations of the piece. And I wonder, obviously we are discussing here the bodily transmission of knowledge, but there is also something beautifully mediated through the film, which I believe to an extent perhaps could be used, perhaps as an aide-memoir or in different sorts of way. I just wonder whether you could comment on the capability of this documentation of this film.
I mean, I'd be interested to ask her more questions about that. The film, I'm guessing, it is a documentation. It's a very beautiful documentation. It is the only one of that time of her doing it. And a lot of her dances weren't video. There's no video film version documentation of it. She was quite happy that film was shown alongside the live performances at the Neue National Gallery as it was on a pedestal, it was played, there was text, it's a piece. But I think she's very strict that it's not to be used as a pedagogical tool for learning the dance. And other than that, she seems quite happy and comfortable with it. It's just very specific. So, I don't know what you're alluding to exactly, but it is part of the archive. It is seen and used and shared.
And are you using this as an aide-memoir, or are you activating, knowledge is activated through your body? Are you ever? Do you go
I definitely look at it as a reference point, because sometimes I have to check things like, okay, what movement came next? Did she do one of those or two of those? And then check the notes. And sometimes I have to go back and ask her. So it is a reference point for just remembering what comes next to sequence it. Yeah.
But I think that especially about this recording we just saw, we need to really remember it's 10 years after commissioned by Sally Baines, in a time when Yvonne was not performing anymore, but became already a film director, and she agreed to do it, but for herself it's already a revisitation, and it's not an original whatever creation. In this note, I actually must say that for the references on Trio A, I love the most the Charles Atlas documentary, in which there is a kind of a mockumentary moment, a fake moment, in which Yvonne Rainer in her 70s is teaching Martha Graham Trio A. And this is actually done by an incredible impersonator of Martha Graham, and she is learning Trio-A in the outfit of Yocasta, and this is exactly to answer your question. I think I found it incredible because you really hear Yvonne instructing Martha Graham how to do it differently, because Graham, of course, goes into this drama of all these heroines and everything with this, and it's an incredibly funny reflection of Yvonne herself. Really hilarious part of the documentary. And actually I think it's also important to remember that she has a very particular relationship to Martha Graham. Because I mean, when she arrived from studying with Anna Halprin, and the West, I know it from herself, just like I know Yvonne as well. And she was really like dreaming, and everybody there was dreaming to take classes with Martha Graham, and Martha Graham always considered her super crappy. I mean, she hated Yvonne dancing also. Yeah, so I mean, this is a very interesting kind of relationship that, of course, she's mocking Martha Graham, but she's also revenging, right, in this documentary on this moment when she, as a young dancer, was trying to learn modern dance, Martha Graham style, and she couldn't. So it's a lot of layers. I think it's good to know when we watch these documentaries or kind of, part of an archive.
Yeah, I think she struggled sometimes with the technical demands of dancers and body type, because there's huge demands on that being and we can't forget the Judson Dance Theatre. They were, they were not getting into festivals, and they made a choice to do the work they were doing. They weren't necessarily fitting in. But I also say too, in terms of, and it was Richard Moove, who interprets Martha Graham. Just really quick, again, going back to tennis. I mean, you think about bodies. I mean, if you look at you look at John McEnroe playing in the 70s tennis, and you look at tennis today, there's a huge shift in the way people play and the articulation and the speed. And if you ever get a chance, if you haven't seen it already, Lucinda Childs' work Dance, in which on the screen there's the projected image of the original dance. I don't know the details of it. In black and white you see the dancers, and behind that screen you see the live dancers performing the same dance in synchronicity. But what I notice is the toes are a bit more pointed of the dancers today, and the lines are a bit more extended and long, and that's curious and interesting to me. We evolve and we change, and techniques change, and maybe we get better or faster, or I don't know, we're not the same.